in the Bible has to do with the feeding of the 5,000, and then depending on which gospel account you read, some of them have Jesus walking on the water, but Matthew always has that same incident, Peter walking on the water. Okay? Just for a point of reference, out of all the miracles that Jesus did, other than the resurrection itself, the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle that's recorded in all four Gospels. So, let us take our cue from that, where God repeats himself. It's like a parent talking to a teenager and saying, how many times do I have to tell you this before you get it? Because what we're going to see before the hour is over is that the disciples did not get it. And it explicitly says so. So, read along with me, John chapter 6, starting in verse 1. After this, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. The huge crowd kept following him wherever he went because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. Then Jesus climbed a hill and sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, he asked, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that to this huge crowd? Tell everyone to sit down, Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. Afterward, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted. After everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. So they picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten the 5 barley loaves. So my first question for the class this morning is, what was the answer that Jesus was looking for from Philip?
Say again?
What was the correct answer that Jesus was looking for? The text said he was testing Philip. Every test has correct answers and wrong answers. What was the correct answer that Jesus was looking for when he's testing Philip?
God provides.
God provides. Okay.
For them to trust in Jesus, knowing that he's going to take care of it.
Okay. Yeah, kind of the same thing. Okay.
To believe that it'll happen.
Okay. My question is, did Philip pass the test?
No.
No.
I would say no. Okay. He left Jesus completely out of the equation. Okay. Because Philip basically, instead of really even recommending an answer, what Philip did was describe the scope of the problem. That's all Philip did. He just basically looked at Jesus and said, this is how big and bad the problem is. As if Jesus didn't know that.
He's being realistic in his mind, isn't he?
Yes, he's looking at objective reality.
Right.
He has his tape measure, his scales, he's weighing, he's measuring, he's assessing.
You knew how much they cost.
Okay, yes, and that's right. He basically said, you know, I'm so mentally engaged in this that I can tell you what won't work. Philip, at least, was out there paying attention. What Philip, to his credit, did say is, I have no idea.
Yeah, he said in John 6:7 in the King James,
Uh-huh.
Philip answered him, 200 pennies worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little.
Okay,
So he was saying, we don't have the money.
okay, right. And then Andrew pipes up, okay, and Andrew doesn't so much describe the scope of the problem. He basically says, this is the best answer I can come up with. We have these loaves and these fishes. Let's think about that. There's about 5,000 men here. There could have been 10,000 people. There's this little boy with his little basket. How much of an eagle eye do you have to sit there and look at 10,000 people and say, I see that? That's a pretty sharp eye. That's a very observant man. He would make a great detective. He doesn't miss any clues. So I give him credit for that. Okay? We're going to flip over now to Mark 6. We're going to come back to John. We're going to go over to Mark 6 and read another account of the same event because there's a little bit of a difference to it. Mark 6, and I want you to find your way to verse 35. Mark 6, starting in verse 35. Late in the afternoon, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the nearby farms and villages and buy something to eat." But Jesus said, "You feed them." With what, they asked. We'd have to work for months to earn enough money to buy food for all these people. How much bread do you have? Jesus asked. Go and find out. They came back and reported, we have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Then the accounts kind of line up with each other after that. But here's what I want you to see. Where in the conversation we saw with Jesus and John, Jesus took the initiative and basically asked Philip a question, right? Where are we going to get bread to feed these people? Jesus took the initiative. Here, the disciples are taking the initiative. They go to Jesus before he ever even talks about food, and they say, Jesus, there's a problem here. It's late in the afternoon. We don't have stuff here. What you need to do is to make an announcement from the pulpit, sending these people back home to find food because the sun's going down and everybody's going to be wanting to eat. So what the disciples do is they take the initiative in this account and they describe the problem. But they go a step further. Instead of saying, Jesus, these people are hungry, what should we do? They say, Jesus, these people are hungry, this is what you need to do. Do you see the difference? Okay? Because these two interplays are important, and here's why. That is the way it works with us. Sometimes we take the initiative, we go to the Lord, and we say, there's this problem, and this is what you need to do about it. Okay? We don't ask him what to do about it. We tell him what we think he should do about it. The coin can be turned over. There are times in our lives when God providentially, through circumstances, comes up to you and says, there's a problem here. What are you going to do about it? Jesus tells these people, you go feed them. Did Jesus expect them to run into town, empty their pockets of all the money they have, buy a sack of groceries, and come back? When Jesus gave that command, did he expect them to pull a rabbit out of their hat, 12 guys, 10,000 people, maybe more? You figure out how to feed them. Is that why Jesus said, go feed them? I would say that's probably not why he said that. If that's not why he said that, why did he say that? If that's not what he meant, why did he say that?
Well, from a teaching standpoint, he wants to teach them something. And what he
I
wants
would
to
think
teach.
he wants them to teaching something.
Yeah, he wants to
However, there's a problem with this. It's not in an academic classroom like this. Why does that matter? Because usually, forever how bad or good that I might be as a teacher, when you show up in this building or in that building over there, you are anticipating being taught something. Are you not? Otherwise you wouldn't show up. However, when I'm sitting out in the boondocks on the side of a hill and I've got a bunch of hungry people, I don't see that as a classroom. Therefore, when God asks me questions, it's like, I have to think a minute. What's he after here? In other words, I'm not expecting him to ask me questions. Or to put it another way, when I have a problem and I have these 10,000 hungry people, I'm not really expecting to learn something. I'm expecting God to do something. I'm not expecting to learn something. I'm expecting God to do something. That is the framework of these people, of these disciples. Okay? They have described the problem. Jesus, we got a problem. Jesus, here's what you need to do. Jesus just wheels back around and says, no, you fix it. Do you ever feel like God has done that to you? Or to put it another way, you describe a problem to the Lord, and to use a phrase, you feel like he's just sitting on his hands. Saying, no, Jimmy, you go fix it. I'm not going to do anything here. That's the dynamic that's going on here. Okay? So, however, the disciples' request of Jesus, send them away, is that not a reasonable request? Is that not a logical request?
Yeah.
It's pretty illogical when you have a bunch of hungry people to say, well, let's go to the store and find something to eat. That's the most reasonable solution I can think of. The disciples are just like me. They have a problem, okay? They bring what they think is a reasonable answer to Jesus. Jesus, the reasonable answer is when you have hungry people, you send them to where food is. Let me say that. You send them to where food is. To where food is. Here's the point. Go back to John 6. Let's break down this dialogue a little closer. John chapter 6, down in verse 5, Jesus saw the crowd. He turns to Philip and he says, where can we buy bread for these people? Here's what Jesus does not say. He does not say, Philip, how big is your problem? He does not ask Philip for a head count. However, Philip replies basically with what I call a head count. This much money, these many people. To put it another way, Philip answered back describing the problem. Jesus' question is really more nuanced. He says, where are you going to get it, not how much do you need? When we have our problems, we focus on the scope of the problem. Jesus, with his question, is saying, where are you going to look for this? In other words, he wants Philip to identify not the size of the problem, but the source of the answer. He wants Philip not to focus on the size of the problem, which Philip did. Philip focused on the source of the solution. Where are you going to get it, not how much do you need? If Philip would have picked up on that, he would have said, where? Okay? Store, Jesus. Those are my choices. Instead, Philip bypassed that line of reasoning, and all Philip did was focus on the size of the problem, not the possible source of any answer. That's where Philip missed it.
And we do that too.
And we do
It's
the
the
same thing.
magnitude of a problem
Yes.
that's insurmountable. We have no clue.
Right.
And our first inclination is not to say, Lord, what are you going to do about this problem? But we look at, okay, let's see, if we did this and this and this and this and this and this and this, maybe we might chisel it down.
Maybe it would work.
Right.
Maybe it would work. So Philip's answer, the reason he missed the test, all boils down to two different ideas. Where versus how bad. Where is the answer versus how bad is the problem. Jesus did not say, Philip, how much food do you need? He said, Philip, where will you get it in the first place? When you meld these accounts together, okay, let's back up to the Mark account. In the Mark account, they come to Jesus, and you know what they tell Jesus? The source of the answer is in town. The disciples start out saying, the source of the solution is over here in these towns and villages. Okay? I would submit to you, if you meld these two accounts together, the chronology, the time frame would be something like this. The disciples start out describing the problem and prescribing the solution. Jesus sends these people away so that they can find food. In that sentence right there, the disciples are focusing on the source of the answer. Jesus, clever man that he is, picks up on that. So he turns to Philip and he says, where are we going to get to this? Jesus picks up on their focus on the location, on the source of the answer. He says, okay, I'm going to build a lesson on that right there. So he turns back and he says, okay, Philip, where are we going to get enough for this? Then, once again, when you meld the accounts together, whether it's Philip or the rest of them, basically, Philip and Andrew are the spokesman, just like sometimes Peter is. But when you put the accounts together, all these disciples are really on the same page. Okay? They're all on the same page. So then, they come back, and then, since Jesus says, where are we going to get it? Right? That was Jesus' question. And Philip says, there's no way we can have enough money, but they're still focusing on where, because that's Jesus' question. Where? I know where. This kid has his food. So at that point, Jesus comes back into the dialogue again, and then he says, bring that to me. Do you see the flow of events there? What's critical in this is this, and we're going to see it here in the next few minutes when they walk on water. Is this idea that Jesus is trying to get across is this. Let's think a minute. What have these disciples seen up to this point in time in their walk with Jesus? They have seen water turn to wine, right? They have seen the healing of the nobleman's son. Remember that? The focus there was that man thought Jesus had to be in this town to do the job. And Jesus challenged him on that. Said, go, your son's going to live. Okay? And then what's the third thing these disciples have seen? Remember the lame man that was healed? That walked? The paralytic? These disciples have all that in their memory bank. The reason I think that's important is because this. And all of those other miracles, Jesus never turned to any of them and asked them to learn anything. He never turned to any of them and asked a question. He took the initiative, he acted, they were just passive observers. This is the first miracle that Jesus did, and this is critical. He expects his disciples' participation. He expects them to be focused on it and engaged in it and not just sitting there watching it. Why is that important to us? It works the same way. That there are times in our lives when we go to the Lord, we describe the problem, we describe the solution. He says, where have you looked? Where are you going to look? Okay? And we've got to wrestle with all of that. Okay? Okay? We want him just to do something, but he's not going to do something until you and him have a dialogue. Because he's wanting you to learn something and not just be a passive observer. Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking from the standpoint of the teacher. I think for me, I've given you so many, I do this in my class, I've given you these examples, I've shown you this, we've done this, we've seen this, and then I'm kind of trying to pull it out of them. How come, what, and they look at me with the deer in the headlights look. And I'm sure, and Jesus, of course, being God, knows what they think and know and don't know.
Right.
So perhaps he knows, well, not perhaps, he knows what they think and don't know. And so he's, okay, so they should have learned, this is my standpoint from a teacher, but I don't know. That
Yeah, they should have learned by now. No, we're gonna see it in a few minutes.
Yeah.
That's the exact thing that you're talking about. They should have learned something by now, but they haven't.
Yeah.
Okay?
They should have been able to focus, just say this very casually, they should have been able to focus on the source, in
Right.
other words, of the cure,
Right.
instead of focusing on the
On
problem.
the size of the
Right.
problem.
Yes, which
The
they
size
all
of the
acknowledged and said, you got issues, man,
Right.
we're not gonna be able to fix this. So.
Right. So, picking up in the story, in verse 10 in John chapter 6, Jesus says, tell everyone to sit down. And the disciples followed that order, and they did that. Well, let's think this through just a minute, a little deeper, and how it would look like to them. You remember the story? The disciples have been all night on the Lake of Galilee fishing, and they have caught nothing. Jesus is on the shore. He hollers out, throw your net on the other side of the boat for a great catch of fish. Peter says this, Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. But at your bidding, we will do that. And so they did. What's implied in Peter's statement there? Is he saying, he could have said, Jesus is here. He does great things. I know this is going to work. If you think about it, what Peter says in that answer, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but at your bidding we'll do it. Peter's saying this, you know what? I fished a lot in my life. I know how this works. I don't think I'm going to catch anything, but because you told me to, I will do that. Think of it this way. I'm looking all over the house for something. I cannot find it. I looked all night. I can't find it. Robert comes up and says, Jenny, go look under the couch. It's there.
As usual.
Yes.
I've got a problem there. I'm thinking, what does she know that I haven't already done? I've been through this before. I've lived in this house all my life. I've looked under that couch. I've vacuumed under that couch. I know.
Really?
Careful, you don't dig yourself a hole.
You did, you're in trouble now.
You get the picture.
Oh, this is not hard.
Okay, let's go back to the feeding of the 5,000.
Yes.
These guys are sitting here seeing 10,000 or more hungry people. By now, here are two facts. Big crowd, little fish. And now Jesus says, have them sit down. What would you be thinking? I'm thinking, like Peter, look, bud, I've looked at that fish, I've measured it, I've weighed it. Not only that, I have 11 members of the jury who have looked at this fact, and they will all confirm me, this is all that's here. What's the point of sitting down? What's the point of throwing that net over on the other side of the boat? I know the problem. I've been down this road before. I've provided food for myself as an adult man in Galilee for 40 years. And now you're telling me with these two little sardines and a bunch of stale rolls, and you're telling me to have 10,000 people sit down. But it gets worse, Jesus. If you don't do something, they're going to be mad at me. Why? Because I was your spokesman. You're sitting back here just passing orders to me. I'm the soldier on the front lines dealing with this. That's what's going on here. But to their credit,
They did it.
like Peter with the net, they said, okay, we'll do it. And they did, and you know the rest of the story. But did you have something?
Faith.
Yeah.
Faith, yes. Here's the deal. They're sitting there, I call it wobbling their way through the problem. Their legs are shaky. They're getting wrong answers. You know, they've learned nothing from 3 miraculous miracles they saw with their own 2 eyeballs, okay? All that is lost on them, and they're just kind of bumbling along. All they know is 10,000 people and some rotten fish. That's all they know. But to their credit, you remember Nicodemus when he could not understand about spiritual rebirth? Okay? And I said, Nicodemus, to his credit, he stayed engaged. He didn't throw up his hands and walk away and say, this is gibberish. Okay? How about the woman at the well? When Jesus said, call those husbands, she didn't think, who are you to tell me how to live my sexual life? Which is what would happen today, right?
Yes.
Okay, she didn't do that. She stayed with it. These disciples, to their credit, stayed with it. Okay? And so they did what Jesus told them to do. Jesus did what he did, but now I have one more thing for you to consider in this story. It talks about 12 baskets left over, not 180 baskets. And it certainly doesn't talk about not having enough food. It said everybody ate as much as they wanted. When I was in high school and my mom would cook fried chicken for my 5 siblings and her husband, I could eat half of that by myself and have room left for more. Okay? There was never any leftovers. Trust me. Okay? The amazing thing about this story is this. Let's think of precision of what Jesus did. Let's think of the precision of it. Let's say you had to provide a meal for 10,000 people. And you're thinking, man, I need a truckload. I would err on the side of extra. So that after those 10,000 people ate and were satisfied, I may have a semi-truckload of food left over. Would you buy that?
Yeah.
Because you're cooking for so much. On the other hand, I could make a mistake the other way. If I'm planning it, it's like, there's 10,000, but I only end up with enough for 9,000. I'm 1,000 people short here that are hungry. Let's put dollars and cents to it. Let's say you needed $10 million, okay? And you went out in the mailbox one day and you only found 7, okay? That's a big shortfall. Let's say that you went out though, instead of 10 million, you found 15 million. Somebody did something, but buddy, they did it over the top. That would say something. Now let's say this. Let's say you go out there and you find $10 million and $30. That tells you whoever knew about that problem knew about the exact size of it. The precise size of it. They didn't get the numbers wrong. Why do those 12 baskets matter? If you think about it, you remember when Philip measured the problem in dollars and cents and he really gave some precise wages? That 12 baskets says this. Jesus knew not just the approximate answer to the problem, but the exact answer to the problem. 12 baskets, no more, no less, left over, shows that Jesus did not know there were 10,000. He knew there were 10,134. If he just knew there were 10,000, you could have had a big shortfall or a big excess. But by having just 12 and no more, that shows an amazing thing. Not only can I come up with food for 10,000, but I can come up for food for 10,134.
Was it for the disciples, the 12?
The 12. But so the point of the 12 baskets is twofold. One, it shows Jesus knows the exact size of the problem, not just the general size, not just the approximate size. When we talk about the distance from the sun to the earth, we say 93 million miles. We don't say 93,134,246.23 feet. Do you see the difference?
Yes.
Jesus is trying to make a point to these disciples. You think you had to tell me the size of the problem. I actually know the size of it better than you do. Because,
Jim, could there be some other symbolism in the 12 baskets because of the 12 disciples? Jesus is showing them, it may look like scraps, but it is the food for the masses, which you are now required to send.
yes,
And it also tells the disciples that they have come to serve the 12 tribes of Israel. They are bringing the good news, the bread of life, to the 12 tribes of Israel. And that they're going to be called upon to participate in that. Because he does it later when he feeds the 4,000 in Decapolis. Now he's saying, am I getting ahead of things?
no, there is symbolic stuff here. One I didn't cover, but in John's account, he talks about the Passover festival. Some commentators think there's a tie-in there with the manna from heaven and all that happened for those people then. So yes, there's these, I call it this, there's these layers of symbolic meaning, but if you don't get the practical meaning, it's lost. We're going to see that they didn't get the practical meaning. Turn to Matthew 14, and we're going to read verses 24 through 33. Matthew 14, verses 24 through 33. Or actually, we'll pick it up in 22. Matthew 14.
You're dropping your voice really
Matthew
bad.
14, 22 through 33. Matthew 14, 22 through 33. Immediately after this, which is the feeding of the 5,000, if you look right above that. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat, cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hill by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over to the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped, and the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. Let's go back up to verse 28. Where Peter said, "If it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." Does that verse express faith in what Jesus said 30 seconds earlier? Or does it express doubt? Doubt. If it expressed faith, Peter would not have said, "If it's really you, tell me to walk." He would say, "Since it's really you, tell me to walk." Would you buy that?
Yeah.
Okay? So, what did Peter not believe? When Jesus said, "Take courage, I am here, don't be afraid," evidently that went in one of Peter's ears and out the other. Okay? In other words, if he would have believed that statement, he would have not have put forth what I call a Gideon fleece to Jesus. What do I mean by the Gideon fleece? You remember the story where God wanted Gideon to go fight a battle? And Gideon said, "Well, make the fleece wet, ground dry." Okay? And then the next day, Gideon reversed it. He wanted, I call it confirmation. He wanted confirmation, or he wanted certainty. Right? That's, to me, is what Peter's doing here. Jesus said, "Take courage. Don't be afraid. I'm here." Peter's thinking, "I'm not so sure. If what you're saying is true, tell me to do what you're doing." right? Did you buy it?
Yeah.
Okay. So Peter did that, and you know the rest of the story. Okay. Once again, where in the dialogue in John, Philip was in the what I call the hot seat. This time in this dialogue, Peter's in the hot seat.
Typical.
Huh?
Typical Peter.
Yes.
Typical Peter. Okay. Okay. So Peter has trouble believing, and he puts this test out there. Okay. So to me, he's much like Gideon. But we typically think of Peter as being full of faith, right? The guy who's all in. Do you remember Thomas? After Jesus was resurrected, I'm not going to believe unless I see that. I submit to you, Gideon, Philip, Peter, Thomas, underneath it all have the same problem. Would you buy that?
Yes.
Seeing is believing.
Seeing is believing. Okay.
That's human nature.
Yeah.
Thinking, it is human nature.
I have a story to tell you. It happened yesterday. I have a son that has a disease where he's dying every day. Okay, a long time ago, the doctor said he wouldn't live for 3 days. Well, that was when he was 32. Now he's 58 or 59. My daughter-in-law, his wife, called me. She says, I'm so mad. She said, I'm calling my mother-in-law to vent. Oh, good. She said, but Mom, I want you to know the end of the story. She was actually calling me to have a confession. My son has a disease that eats his brain. And so he has a cognitive problem and everything else. You can't cure it. Okay, he's on the government with SIS, Social Security, and blah, blah, blah. One pill, and he takes 7 pills. One pill costs $1,000. One. So, our government, you and I, we pay for his medication. She got a letter in the mail saying Medicare had been canceled. Medicaid. And I said, oh no! See how I reacted? And she says, I did the same thing too. She said, I was so mad. She called the government, blah, 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 and you know how the government is. So Raymond said, God will take care of it. He always takes care of me. He has a cognitive situation. I think we all should have a cognitive balancing situation because he said that. And Paula said, we're working with the government here. And so, to make a long story short, she said, so I had to go down, but she says, okay, I couldn't see where God was going to help the government. They went down. Finally, she went down and walked in. She said, he's going to die if you take away his Medicaid, because she could not afford to buy any of the pills. And the woman said, oh, we didn't get the letter. Let me go see. She went back, got the letter. Oh, we didn't see the letter. We're sorry. So they gave Raymond back his Medicare. And Paula says, I can't yell at him anymore. and it's just like Peter and Paul. We're talking about that right here. We fight all kinds of battles in, this world. And it's like not having any food to eat sometimes. And Raymond, he's just really an amazing guy. He said, God did it. And Paula called me, she said, so I'm venting this to you.
It's wonderful.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, I would appreciate it if he could do something about my income taxes.
Yeah, amen.
We all have this stuff going on, but I thought that I would, Paula couldn't see at the moment how God was going to take care of this. She said she was so short-sighted. And her husband kept saying, but God always takes care of me, Papa, always.
And he has shown it.
And he did. But she's they're such fabulous little Christian kids. You'll meet him here in November probably, but
Okay.
Yay.
that was the story of yesterday. She was so upset. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's a great story.
Yeah.
It's a great story. So, to kind of bring this to a head, we're going to look at the other account of the walking on the water in Mark chapter 6. Okay? Mark chapter 6, and we'll pick up in verse 47. Mark 6:47. Late that night, the disciples were in the boat in the middle of the lake. Jesus was alone on land. He saw they were in serious trouble, rowing hard, struggling against the wind and the waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. They were all terrified when they saw him. But Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here. Then he climbed into the boat and the wind stopped. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. Their hearts were too hard to take it in. So, even as Andrew and Philip were the kind of the focus and the spokesman for the situation in John on the feeding of the 5,000, when Jesus walked on the water, once again, all the disciples were scared. Okay? However, Peter was the one that said, prove it to me if you're here. And we saw how that happened. But the pivot point of this whole time this morning is this. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. Their hearts were too hard to take it in. I don't think their hearts were too hard to take it in because they were out there stealing and committing adultery. We think of hardening as being sin. I don't think their hearts were too hard because of that kind of problem. Why do you think their hearts were too hard to take in the significance of feeding 10 to 15,000 people? And keep in mind, that happened on that day. They're there at night. So all this stuff happens within hours of each other. What happened there? How can you see 15,000 people fed miraculously, get into your boat, start rowing across the lake, there's a bit of a storm blowing, Jesus shows up, and you miss it entirely, what you should have learned back there?
Part of it is fear.
Fear, okay.
Because, like Paula said yesterday, she was scared to death because there was no money. Raymond said, no, God takes care of me all the time.
Okay.
And it was her fear that she had no money to buy Raymond that expensive medicine.
Right.
And so I think sometimes we are guilty of that. I know I am sometimes. What am I going to do? How can this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's fear. It's not hardening of the heart, but it's a human reflex, I guess you might say.
Yeah, but the disciples have been fishermen for years, and so, a storm, I don't know.
I'm sure it wasn't their first storm.
That's right.
So what's going on here?
My point is, you've got the human experiments going on, and then you've got this miracle
Mm-hmm.
going
But
on.
why can they not, what I do call connect the dots?
Right.
Yes.
Why can they not connect the dots?
Consistent.
Or really even at all, this
Yeah.
one time, yeah, but for sure consistently.
I think it's what have you done for me lately? It's just
That's what I was thinking.
situational, It's situational on this situation, but they can't apply it to the other situation,
It's this situation, but they can't apply it to the other situation. But whatever is going on here, let's ask the question in a different way. If you were Jesus and you made it to the other side of the lake and you're all sitting there and you're reviewing it, kind of like the way football coaches do on Monday with game film from
Correct.
Sundays,
Yes.
where you review the game and you see what happened good and bad, or you're a teacher and you gave out a math test, and so now you're reviewing the test after it's all over so these students can figure it out. So I'm going to ask you something. If you're Jesus and the disciples were to say, well, what were you supposed to get from this? What was your point? What do you want? What would you say that Jesus would say to them?
What he's told them over and over and over. I mean, he's gone over these things for the whole 3 years, and they don't open their minds.
Let me ask you a different question. In just a minute, I'm
Yeah.
gonna give you a chance. Let's put it a different way. Let's say you're a counselor. Somebody comes in with all their troubles and problems, okay? Think of it that way. If you're the counselor, what would you tell them? This is what God is trying to teach you in this. What would you say?
Well, first of all, I don't tell my students, I ask them. So I say things like, well, what did we do? Did you see me feed did you see the water change? Well, yeah. Did you see the loaves? I would ask them all these things. Now, this is what I do with my students, because I don't want to answer for them. I want them to figure it out. And then if they figure it out, then they get it. If I tell them, but I don't know. I would be.
The disciples have been walking with Christ for years. Walking, talking, years. And so it is,
Sweetheart, how many years have we been married and you still don't get it?
so,
Careful, Terry, careful.
I'm just saying.
she assumes that she's correct.
I don't know that. I'm just saying.
So, the problem continues and it's never been corrected.
I think you're hit on it. I have realized myself, especially being a skeptic, that no matter what God does, if He does something 50 times, and when it comes up to 51, I will probably struggle as hard at 51 as I did at number 1. I need to expect it to be that hard. I had this illusion in my head back when I was 35. I came to the Lord when I was 19. And my illusion was this: Jimmy, as you grow stronger, all these troubles will get easier. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Like vacuuming under the covers.
They don't get easier, do they?
That's good.
They don't get easier.
No, they
The
don't.
only thing that can change
Right.
is what Mark puts his finger on right here.
Right.
It won't get easier, but hopefully I will get better at connecting the dots. It won't feel any easier. It won't feel any better. But hopefully I will get better at connecting the dots.
We need to be like her son,
Yeah.
that immediately said, God's got this.
Right.
I don't have to worry. I don't know how, but He's got this. And we need to be that person that as soon as we're hit with the tornado that took our house, okay, God, how are you going to rebuild this? It's up to you. It's your house.
Yes.
My life. You do it. Now I'm going to sit back and watch you.
No. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you have to do. Here's a key point.
Yeah.
You have to go get your little bit of loaves
Right.
and your little rotten fish and bring them to Him.
Right. You have to go to the Social Security office.
You have to go
Right.
to the
You
Social
can't sit
Security
there.
office.
Yeah, that's right. You can't sit.
Here is the deal. God can do some of His biggest miracles, not necessarily for you, but through you,
Yes.
With you.
with you.
Right.
You get to participate
Right.
in the miracle,
Yeah.
not just watch it happen.
Right.
But here's the problem. I would really rather just watch it
Of
happen.
course. Me
Tell me
too.
when it's
I would
over.
really just...
Tell me when it's over.
Well, here's something else I want you to see from this.
Drop from it.
None of the crowds benefited from what the disciples did. But the test wasn't for them. They just showed up and ate and went home.
I got a question. Did He not do any kind of preaching or saving or miracles during the time they were all in the...
Come back next week.
Oh!
And what we're going to see is a spotlight shifts from the disciples to the crowd. And believe me, it's going to be ugly.
I mean, 5,000 people sitting there, and all He did was feed them some rotten fish.
So,
That was just the men. It was
So-
much bigger
The
than
women
that.
were smart enough not to sit down with them.
They ate.
so what I need to expect is
That's
this. I need to really try to cultivate the ability to connect the dots. I need to expect that I will be expected to bring my little loaves and my little fish, no matter how small they are, against the scope of an enormous problem. Because I think that what's the use of bringing the loaves? It won't work anyway. What's the use of casting the net over on the other side of the boat? I've seen this before. I know all about fishing. It won't work. I've got to work through all of that. I've got to work through all those assumptions, all those illusions, and all of that. But what else do I need to expect? Your children, your students show up in that classroom knowing they're going to have to take a test, don't they?
Yes.
That's expected. Jesus did not wake up that morning and say, now here it is, 12 people. Later on today, there's going to be a test. Have your pencil out, your calculator, be ready, be on the alert, pay attention. No, it was an everyday thing. And yes?
Are you saying that life experience has no relevance?
What did he say?
Are you saying that life experience has no relevance?
I'm saying that seeing your life experience correctly has a great deal of
Yes.
relevance, because blindness happens, hardness of heart happens when you don't see the relevance of the everyday experience. Feeding and eating is one of the most common experiences on the face of the planet. Is it not?
Yes.
Nothing's more everyday than eating. Right? And if you're a disciple and you've been out on that Sea of Galilee as a fisherman all your life, that's extremely a very common venue. Okay? So Jesus did not warn his disciples that a test is coming up. Make sure you study. No. The studying was supposed to happen all along.
Right.
Make it a relationship.
Right.
And so, just remember that although your ministry may be for the masses, the test is for you.
Yes. Isn't that the truth?
You may be called to minister, and you are. The New Testament makes it clear. But God wants to work through you, not for you, in a special way. He will work through you, but not for you, in a special way. Any other comments or questions before we close?
Yeah, but it's for next week.
Stay
He
tuned.
said he has a question, but it's for next
See,
week.
I have to bring mine up now. I've been
And I
told
won't
to
be
be waiting.
here, so.
Here you go.
Well, what's your question then?
Go ahead, Dave.
I think with 5 to 10 to 15,000 people had faith when they looked up there and they saw Jesus giving thanks to these 2 or 3 loaves or 2 or 3 basketfuls and going, you know, if I'm in the front row, I'm going, hey, I might get a little bit. If I'm in the back row, it's like, yeah, like that's going to make it to me. You know, I take commendation for those folks to be able to stick around and say, hey, let's see what's fixing to happen.
The whole reason there, and I didn't go into it due to lack of time, but when you read before some of this, the whole reason they were there, it says because of the miracles they had seen.
Sure.
That's right.
So yes, there from a certain perspective, what you're saying is absolutely true.
True.
And here's the thing, like I said, next week, they're going to get pulled into this whole thing too.
Okay.
Okay? Jesus has questions for them, challenges for them. And so we'll see that next week. Anything else? Let's pray. Father, I just ask that you would help us to deal with the hardness that's inside of each one of us. Help us to see the blind spots that we have. Help us to identify where we're having trouble connecting the dots. And just thank you that whether it's us or from this man who had to go back to the government to get the money he needed to survive, that you make a way, but you will never make it in advance till we get there. And I just ask that you help us to have faith in that process, to have faith in Jesus who's already 2 steps ahead of us. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.